Okay, happy Friday to you guys. I'm trying something a little different today. I'm going to be flying around the city of Tyre. This is actually Tyre, Lebanon, behind me, and we are flying around it. You can look at it. It's kind of similar to what they describe in the book. Of course, it's an ancient city in the book, and here you see there are some ruins in part of the city, so they have some of the old preserved some of the old buildings, or at least found them. Of course, there's going to be new buildings as well. All right, so I'll try to not get dizzy while I read this because flying in a helicopter and reading and flying at weird angles like this can make someone quite dizzy. All right, well, let's get started. If you remember before, there's quite a mystery going on because we don't know what's going on with these firstborn sons. We don't know what this is about the Temple of Moloch that gives Uriah a strange feeling. We know that Uriah and Jotham are now, they might bond over this weird, this situation where Uriah beat up the foreman who was beating up a slave. And Uriah didn't like that. And obviously Jotham doesn't like that either. And then there was Jabin, the little boy that everybody was treating so respectfully and kind of strangely. All right, so we're going to do two chapters. I'll try to read right through them. Of course, this book is complicated. There's some complex issues, so we'll have to explain a little bit of them if we can, but I'm going to have to really kind of get through it so we're not sitting here for 40 minutes. All right, so I'm going to do two chapters today, 5 and 6. Chapter 5, the Temple of Moloch. Hannibal had come to meet us. Remember, Hannibal is the young son of Ethbal. Hannibal had come to meet us, not knowing what had been going on. He and Jotham were to board his father's ship to check the cargo and the accounts, and he sent me on ahead with Achil to be shown whatever interested me. Remember who Achil is? Achil is the blue-eyed man who resembled the man who beat Uriah's father to death. And he's a sea person, part of the sea people. I walked beside the shipmaster in sullen silence. He did not speak to me either, but swung along humming sea songs beneath his breath. Several times he slashed viciously with his staff at slaves and commoners who got in his way. I thought he did this out of cruelty rather than anger, for he seemed in a good enough humor. He's just walking along smacking people with his stick. The black ship was larger, close to it. I'm sorry, let me start over. The black ship was larger, close to, than it had seemed at a distance. Walking up the gangplank, I set foot for the first time on the deck of a ship and did not like it, thinking of the green water rolling beneath its hull. Achilles' cabin, remember he's afraid of water, he's afraid he can't swim, he's afraid of boats. Achilles' cabin had fine hangings of goatskin, fine rugs and furnishings, and, above all, ornaments and objects of art so perfectly and beautifully carved and molded and painted that I could hardly believe it. Before I could ask him where they came from, voices were heard outside the cabin. Come in, my young lords, Achil cried as Hannibal and Jotham followed us. I have figures here and totals and the rattle of silver that will gladden your hearts. But first, and he bowed low to Hannibal, there are presents in my box for the Lady Mehitabel, poor things, but they may give her pleasure. Let her come aboard when she wishes and take her pick. Hannibal nodded graciously, but Jotham reddened with anger. Achil saw it and smiled. I was paying attention to these little clues, these little hints. Why would Jotham get mad about that? Why would Achil smile about that? The business of the day began. Hannibal and Jotham sat before a table checking Achilles' cargo list and weighing out the silver shekels, which is the money, he had received on his voyage. I watched the proceedings of these merchants with scorn at first, meaning now these lazy, fat merchants that are wimps and they can't fight and blah, blah, blah. I watched the proceedings of these merchants with scorn at first, then, to my shame, became interested. I would have liked to understand the marks on the tablets and papyrus. Now he's wishing he could read. The rest of the day we spent on the flat deck watching and checking cargo that was taken from the ship. Metals from the north lands of Achaia, papyrus from the town of Byblos, and merchandise that Ethbal would sell at a profit, and of course, slaves. Some of these slaves were men who might have been of the people of Achille, but he showed no interest in any of them except one. This was a well-dressed, assured young man to whom he spoke in a low voice before telling Hannibal that he had bought him on his own and that he was destined as a present for the chief of Tyre. I thought that Hannibal, for some reason, seemed disturbed at that, but he made no protest. Hannibal went home for the evening meal. I want you to remember that part too. Achille brought in this slave to give to the chief of Tyre. A slave or a spy, you decide. Hannibal went home for the evening meal, but Jotham and I stayed late, and food was cooked for us in the ship's galley. We ate on the deck, and toward the end of the meal, I saw gangs of men in chains being led up from below and walked about at the other end of the ship. Never had I seen men so pale and gray of skin, though some looked as though they might have been dark men naturally. And the smell of them reached us, and some of them I could see were so thin and weak that it was hard for them to stumble across the deck. "Who are they?" I asked one of the sailors. "The oarsmen," said the sailor. "Our captain doesn't believe in wasting much food on them when they won't live long anyway." Are you getting the cruelty of this, of some of these people? They're galley slaves. They're the ones that are pulling the oars to propel the ship. And they don't live long, so why feed them? Because the work is so grueling they can die. Crazy. Jotham and I walked home together that night, with a warehouse slave carrying a torch to light our way. We were silent at first, for I was thinking of all that I had seen that day, the wonder of the sea, the splendor of the ship's master's cabin, the rich goods in the warehouse of Ethbal, and also of the pallor and hopelessness on the faces of the children in the weaving rooms, and the workmen by the copper furnaces, of what Hannibal had told me of the dye houses and the brutality of Achille. Finally, Jotham spoke. "Do you still think Tyre's a fine town?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied. Suddenly he stopped still in the street. "This is the Heart of Tyre," he said. "Have you seen it?" I looked about me and saw, with that strange cold feeling I had felt before, that we were in the open space in front of the Temple of Moloch. See more about the Temple of Moloch. Pay attention to this. "Come on," said Jotham, and the torchlight made his eyes glitter. "Come inside." I followed him into the courtyard with its trees sacred to Adani, its pillar of honor to the serpent Shan, and its image of the holy Astarte, other gods, other pagan gods. There was an unpleasant odor about the place, as there is about altars where animals are sacrificed. It was dark, but Jotham told the trembling servant to raise his torch, and the blaze suddenly outlined the figure of a great black image squatting within, its arms outstretched. I started and made the ancient sign against evil. Never had I seen so ugly a god. "This is Moloch," said Jotham, "the Lord of wrath." Wrath is like anger. "He who devours the firstborn children of Canaan." Oh, the firstborn again is coming back. And all at once I understood. "The oldest son of Ethbal?" I said. "The little boy, Jabin." "They are chosen from the greatest families of the cities," said Jotham, staring at the image, "and dedicated to Moloch, in case a time of trouble should come upon the city. A fire is kindled in the lap of the god, and the child is laid in his arms to die. All the city comes to see. I began to shiver, staring at the black outstretched arms, but I said nothing, for we Hittites had been taught to worship all the gods. After a moment, Jotham shrugged and led me out of the place. We walked home in silence. So they take a firstborn child of the wealthiest, the best families in all of Tyre, and they burn it. They burn the baby boy alive in the lap of Moloch. And that is making Uriah obviously freaking out. And he's thinking how horrible that is. And so does Jotham. But the rest of the city, it's just the way that they keep their city safe. The god Moloch will keep them safe, they believe, if they sacrifice their firstborn sons from their best families. That night I could not sleep. I decided I never would till I had driven the image of Moloch from my mind. And for a start, I asked Jotham some questions. Where does the kill come from? I asked him. From the west. He is one of the sea people, said Jotham. And after a moment, he added, he is a spy. Did you see that slave he brought here for the chief of the city? Yeah, what about him? He is no slave, but he will be in the household of the chief, and all that he learns there he will tell to a kill. I thought of the ox carts and the chariots of the sea people at home, and felt the old fear. Why, I asked, should they send spies into Canaan? Then Jotham began to tell me about the sea people, and I listened eagerly, for I realized that though they had destroyed my world and almost my life, I knew nothing about them. They are the children of Zeus, this thunderer. You guys know about Zeus. They are the children of Zeus, the thunderer, he said, from the islands to the western mainland and up into the forests of the north, even beyond the river Danube. Some of them, like the ancestors of Achille, came down many years ago and married with the ancient peoples and became subjects of the old Minos of Crete. Crete is a big island in the southern part of Greece. I've been there. It's beautiful. Minos, I said. Here at least was something I had heard of. The great kings who have lived in the labyrinth, the house of the double axe in Knossos, who bred, I've been to Knossos too, by the way, who bred the great bulls for the bull dances? But they were friends of our people. Yes, said Jotham. All they wanted was our trade, but the earthquakes came, and their great city of Knossos was ruined, and the Minos was overthrown by his subjects on the mainland, the men with the northern blood in their veins. Now their great men are the sons and kinsmen of the Achaean Atreus, Agamemnon, Odysseus, and the rest. Odysseus is my favorite Greek hero. They live in the old palaces and cling to what is left of the old arts and comforts. But new people are coming down into their land from the far north, more than ever before, and they say they need more room. So they are leaving their homes and coming into the east. They have come to Great Hatti. Next, it will be Egypt by way of Canaan. That is why they are sending spies into Tyre. So the Greeks are coming this way. The Greeks are coming to the east, into Great Hatti, down through Canaan, and then ultimately into Egypt. But why do the Canaanites not stop them? Jotham shrugged. The Canaanites are only slaves of Egypt. Why should they care if they change masters, if they can keep their riches and go on burning their children in the fire of Moloch? I lay for a while, turning all these new things over in my mind, then sat up on my elbows and stared at Jotham with curiosity and envy. How do you know all these things? I asked him. I listen to the traders and sailors, said Jotham, and I read what I can. It passes the time. I was silent for a while. Then suddenly, to my own surprise, I heard myself asking, what are those 22 signs that Hannibal spoke of? The alphabet signs? Jotham sat up too and looked at me. Do you want to learn? And so, till far into the night, we sat over a papyrus, which is paper, and did not sleep till I had memorized the 22 signs from which all the words of the tongues of the nations might be formed. And I knew that in one night I had made myself master of what scholars before me, scholars of the ancient picture writing, had spent all their youth in learning. But before I slept, I asked Jotham one more question. To which of the sea peoples does Akil belong? To a people from the island of Crete. Kaftor is what we call it, he said. The Egyptians called them Palest. We call them the Philistines. Chapter 6. Now this is you're going to get a little story here within the story, and it's something to remember, something to think about. It doesn't, I don't know, we'll just read it and see. I stayed in Tyre. I had not forgotten my promise to my father to go to Harosheth and to find the man named Sisera, but I told myself I could go there at any time and would be much better prepared by what I was learning in Tyre. Besides, as long as I intended to go, I had not really broken my promise. So I pushed it out of my mind, and soon it ceased to trouble me. I learned quickly in the house of Ethbal, having mastered the alphabet signs. I soon learned to put them together into the words that appeared on the papyrus and tablets in the warehouse, words such as gold, silver, copper, bronze, wool, and shekels. Shekels are the money, it's the coins. I learned many other kinds of words too. There was a place in Tyre where books were collected, and sometimes I went there. What I found in these tales and stories showed me a world that had gone on for thousands of years before the fathers of the Hittite lords had come down from the north and found it, and that had surely not always been the same. I read stories of great nations that had risen and fallen, and sometimes risen again under new names. Many of the stories were from Babylon. One that I read told of a great flood that had covered the world long ago. It told of a man who had been warned of the flood by the gods. So he had built an ark and saved himself and his family and two of every kind of animal, and became the father of all nations. There were books on sciences too. By the way, you probably noticed that as Moses, right? Or not Mo, I'm sorry. Noah, Noah's Ark. You were probably thinking Noah. There were books on sciences too, the sciences of numbers and the stars, who were of course the gods. One night, as I was walking past the hangings that separated the quarters of the Lady Maris from the rest of the house, I heard music, voices and laughter coming from inside. I was curious, but did not dare enter without being invited, so I stood still and coughed as if I had taken the fever, till the hangings were pushed aside and the face of Mehetabel peered out. Come in, she said. You were just in time for the story of the princess and the Hittite prince. Remember, he's a Hittite, so he'd be interested in hearing that story. I entered the apartment. The little Egyptian fox dog that belonged to Mehetabel barked angrily and nipped at my ankles, but I was used to that. The grandmother sat in a reclining chair, listening to the music of a flute played by a little servant girl in the corner of the room. Remember, there's no radio, so they had to have live music, if they're going to have any music at all. And at her feet, to my surprise, sat Jotham. Remember, Jotham usually isn't part of these things, but he's right there. The grandmother was telling stories of her youth in Egypt. They were stories she had heard from her grandmother, and I found out later that I could have heard them nowhere else but here, for these were the stories of the accursed city of Akedeton on the Nile, and of the accursed Pharaoh with his one God. So there was one Pharaoh that did believe in one God at one time. And these stories had long been forbidden by law. The Lady Maris did not think that the Pharaoh was accursed. His wife was the most beautiful of women, she was saying. Nefertiti, the beautiful lady, they called her. He went nowhere without her and their 6 little girls, and thought it no disgrace if the children laughed in the temple of the one God. She and the Pharaoh would laugh too, even as they silenced them, and the temple was light and open to the sun. Who was the one God? I asked her. Aten, the light of the sun they called him, she replied. But he was Adonai the Lord, and the Egyptians took him long ago from Canaan. Pharaoh said there was no other but him, that he was the Lord of truth, and he moved his court from the city of the false gods and built the city of Akhetaten. No one may live there now. The priests destroyed him and his god and his city. The beautiful lady was banished from the courts and saw it all happen, but she lived to be old. This is really kind of a story of the first time that the ancient people went from polytheism, many gods, to just monotheism, meaning one God. So that was a struggle in the ancient world for some time. The Lady Maris paused to preen herself a little, a look of pride on her face. Once she visited the family of my grandmother. It was a great honor. She gave this to a woman of our family, and she showed us the small image of a beautiful, delicate face. This is the beautiful lady. It was made for her in her youth by an artist from Crete, who was one of the greatest of them all. I examined the beautiful face carefully, but Jotham looked only at Mehetabel. Mehetabel smiled at him, then spoke to her grandmother. Are you noticing this? See, the ancient people didn't have computers and phones in their face. They had other people. So what they did is they became experts at reading other people, other people's clothing, their nose, their face, their look, their eyes, their expressions. They were much better at that than we are. And what do you think Mehetabel and Jotham are doing? We'll get to that. Tell him the story of the princess and the Hittite prince, she urged, and I looked up with a new interest. Ah, that is too sad, said the grandmother. Besides, it is the most forbidden of all. But he is a Hittite, and it will interest him, said Mehetabel. Besides, it is true. The grandmother smiled and shook her head, but did not protest again. It is the story of the second daughter of the Pharaoh of Akhenaten. For his oldest daughter and her husband were murdered by the priests even before his death. This second daughter, when Pharaoh died, was married to her father's little brother, the young Tutankhamun, King Tut, as you guys know. Hardly more than a child, and the two of them became king and queen. But in his 18th year, the young king died. We know that King Tut died early. How did he die? I asked. It is said that Horemheb, the general of the armies, murdered him with poison. For Horemheb was a low-born man of great ambition who wanted to become pharaoh. To do this, it was necessary for him to marry the young queen, and the priests approved of this, for he was a faithful follower of the old gods of Egypt. But it is said that the young queen had once met a son of Subliuliuma, the great king of the Hittites, who conquered all of Canaan and had loved him. She knew, too, that he was strong and brave and would protect her against Horemheb and the false priests. So she wrote to the great Subliuliuma, saying, "Send me one of your sons that he may be my husband and the ruler of all Egypt." They say that the great Subliuliuma knew who it was she meant and did send him to Egypt to be pharaoh. And who knows, if that had happened, all the world might now be at peace and strong enough to drive out the people from the west. Why didn't it happen? I asked her. Because Horemheb, that low-born general who wanted the throne for himself, heard what the princess had done and sent murderers to meet the Hittite prince on the road and slay him, which they did. So as the Hittite prince was coming to meet her and to marry her, they had soldiers there waiting for him, and they killed him. But the princess died rather than ever be married to Horemheb. So Horemheb never became pharaoh? I asked, hopefully. Yes, said the grandmother. He became strong enough to take what he wanted, even without marrying into the true dynasty. But the gods punished him for his wickedness. How? He never had children. When he died, his friend, the first Ramses, became king. His descendant is on the throne now, but they were never the true kings. She lifted the little image of Nefertiti and gazed upon it. My grandmother used to pray that someday she would stand before the true king of Egypt and give this image into his hand. Once I prayed the same myself, but I know that it will never be. Jotham, who had been listening closely, though he knew that story by heart, said suddenly to Mehitabel, if I had been that Hittite prince and you the princess of Egypt, I would not have let them kill me, leaving them free to harm you. But if I had been the princess, said Mehitabel, I would not have sent for you. I would have gone to you myself to keep you safe. Do you know now? Okay, yes, Mehitabel and Jotham are in love. They're not related, so don't worry about that. They're sort of related. And I knew that Jotham and Mehitabel loved each other. I did not understand it, for he hated her golden hairnets, her headbands, and her hard-heartedness toward the sufferings of the factory slaves. And she hated his scorn of the household images and the fact that he made her think about the factory slaves at all. And so the days went by, and I began to find some happiness in Tyre. I ceased to dream of the sea people in Arzawa. I even thought that perhaps I had found safety and would be able to live out my life in peace. I did not know that a time was coming that would destroy all peace in Canaan, and I did not know that the day was coming closer when I would find myself a partner in the greatest crime known to the men of Tyre, a day that would change my life at least as much as it had been changed before. Okay, that's foreshadowing, telling us what's going to happen, that something big is going to happen. Okay, we need to land this thing. I'm starting to not feel so good. I'll talk to the pilot and tell him to land, and maybe we can get some lunch. All right, you guys have a great day. Have a great weekend. I will see you on the other side of the weekend on Monday. You guys take care, and we'll talk about the book later. Bye-bye.